High-level conversations taking place right now at the White House about a response to Syria. We're going to learn very soon whether the United States military will be conducting some sort of strike on that country. And, of course, we'll bring it to you the second we hear. Many people believe that is likely to happen. It is also almost universally assumed in the United States that that attack can take place with minimal risk. But is that true? Are there possible hazards to a serious strike? Douglas Macgregor is a retired Army colonel. He's author of the book Margin of Victory, and he joins us tonight. Colonel, thanks very much for coming on. So assuming this does happen,
right,
and again, many people believe it will, what are the risks?
Well, it depends on the option that he selects. I mean, obviously, I'm one of those people that voted for Trump, the nationalist,
yes,
who believed that America first meant avoiding conflict and building prosperity at home. The best option is nothing at all. He seems to be in the grip of the globalists, you know, the global nannies that want to run around in Madeleine Albright's world and punish evildoers for reasons that don't make any sense to me, since we have no real interest in Syria, and the war there is effectively over. But I think he's looking at three possibilities right now. One is nothing, which is probably not going to happen. Two is another cosmetic strike, like the one last year.
Yes.
You'll recall that last year we fired 60-some cruise missiles. They landed in the dirt, exploded nicely. Everyone congratulated themselves, and we walked away, and nothing happened. The third option is a serious air and sea-based assault with missiles, aircraft, against a number of very sensitive targets where potentially we could end up killing Russians, Iranians, as well as Syrian government forces and potentially civilians.
It sounds like, from facts that have been reported, the likelihood of killing foreign nationals, Russians specifically, in Syria in a widespread strike is very high. So what would be the consequences if that were to happen?
Well, assuming he doesn't call the Russians and tell them what he's going to hit, which is what he did the last time.
Right.
I think that we'll probably lose potentially some aircraft. We could lose some ships at sea, because the Russians have made it very clear that if they are attacked, they will respond. And they have the capability to do that. And they can respond from Russia. Russia is less than 500 miles away from Syria. We forget that sort of thing. So they have missiles and capabilities, precision-guided strike weapons that can reach our ships at sea. They also have submarines operating in the area, as we do. So the potential for a real collision on the conventional level is very high.
So I think most Americans watching this, whether they supported the idea of the strike, if indeed it happens, want there to be an upside for the United States.
The only upside that I can see is non-intervention, because we don't have anything at stake. If we get involved and we do something along the lines of the third option that I described, and we lose people, Americans are going to say, what? What happened? Why? What's the rationale for this? Remember, Trump used to say over and over and over again, what's in it for us? And he pointed to the last 15 years and said trillions and trillions of dollars lost, nothing achieved. What are we trying to achieve? What's the end state that we're looking for? If all we're doing is expressing our righteous indignation at the alleged use of a chemical weapon, we're kidding ourselves. There are no good guys on the ground in Syria. Any number of people could have done this.
So who are the figures in the president's orbit encouraging this?
Who isn't? I mean, this is the question that, you know, we raise routinely. Again, it's back to the globalist versus the nationalist. He seems to have lots of globalists around him. I'm sure John Bolton is excited at the prospect of bombing somebody somewhere. I suspect that he's being supported in the Pentagon as well. Who's going to push back against this? I don't know. I've never seen any evidence for serious pushback, someone who says absolutely not. So the president seems to be on his own, if he's still the nationalist that he said he was.
Clarify, if you would. I mean, you make, I think, a pretty strong case for not doing this. What would be the case? What is the case being made to the president for doing this?
Well, I think he's being told that he has no choice, which is absolutely wrong. He's the president of the United States. He does not have to intervene under any circumstances. But the globalists are saying, well, it's a matter of global leadership. You have to be seen as being on the moral high ground. Remember, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. We have a lot of hypocrisy in this town about what is right and what is wrong and what is moral and what is not. And I think he's going to be presented with this specious moral argument. There's nothing moral about coming into a war where 250,000 people have already been killed.
You've been around this sort of thing your whole life,
yes,
many decades. Are you surprised by the support that this decision is getting from the left, from liberals on other channels?
No, not at all, because I think the left-right dichotomy is very misleading in this town. I think you have nationalists and you have globalists. The globalists dramatically outnumber those of us who are preeminently concerned about what's in the interest of the United States. They're living in Madeleine Albright's world. And the president is in danger of joining the likes of LBJ and George W. Bush, failed presidents, failed administrations involved in failed wars, by listening to these people. He should not act. If he doesn't act, then he can feel quite comfortable because he's in the company of George Washington, John Adams, and the men who said, we don't want to be part of other people's wars.
Colonel Macgregor, thank you for that. We'll be monitoring the White House all night for any news on Syria, obviously. Hillary Clinton, meanwhile, says America is racist, and the solution is to follow Maxine Waters. That story next.
Racist and white supremacist views are lifted up in the media and in the White House.
Waiting for news on Syria and the American response, and apparently we have some. We want to go to Bret Baier, who had.
Okay, Tucker, just to follow up, this, remember, is just 1 year after the U.S. struck in Syria, April 7th, 2017, 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles from 2 Navy destroyers in retaliation for the sarin nerve gas attacks then. So we are now 1 year later, and it appears, as Jen is reporting from 2 different officials, that the decision has been made to move forward with this strike. What exactly that looks like and how different it may be from the 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles a year ago, we don't know. John Roberts is on the north lawn of the White House with what he's hearing there. John?
We're just a little less than 10 minutes away now from what we're expecting to be a presidential statement out of the diplomatic reception room, which is an area here at the White House that the president has been favoring lately in terms of making official statements. That's where he was when he held his nose and signed the omnibus spending bill. And now it looks like we're going back into the diplomatic reception room again tonight. I can tell you that over the last 3-4 days, the White House has been a hive of activity as the president's national security team has met repeatedly here. Most recently, a deputies meeting at about 5 o'clock this afternoon. Looks like they were just putting dotting the final I's and crossing the final T's in preparation for whatever the president is going to announce tonight. Brett?
John, we want to bring Tucker back in here. You know, it's been interesting to watch this decision-making process. You just had a guest on, Tucker, talking about that and how the president is getting to this point. But obviously, he was out on a limb with what he tweeted directly earlier in the week. And it seemed like as the week went on, we were getting closer and closer to this very decision that's been made tonight.
Right. So tell us how, since you cover this closely and you know everyone involved, tell us how you think we got to this point. This is clearly not something that he ran on, and it's inconsistent with a lot of the things that he said over the years, barring the existence of information that's very different from what we know publicly. Who in his orbit do you think was encouraging this decision?
Well, clearly, his new national security advisor is in the position, at least previously, has said. John Bolton has criticized President Obama for his lack of following up on the red line, as has President Trump, and was largely seen as a successful deployment of those Tomahawk cruise missiles a year ago, felt good about it and talked about it. I think Bolton was probably actively involved here. The inside skinny that we get from officials around town is that there was a battle back and forth about the level of response. Not that there was going to be no response, but what it would look like and whether it would include aircraft and what it looks like. And we're still trying to get tonight what that might be, Tucker.
Yeah, we certainly are. Interesting. So your sources suggest that John Bolton was, and it would make sense, but would be an advocate for this.
Yes, 100%. And, you know, once the president said what he said on Twitter, and obviously he walked it back a bit, saying it could happen at any time, it is in the same position as the president of the United States laying down a marker and saying something, and if it had not been followed through, based on the intelligence they had, they say that the Syrian military is 100% behind this. Now, I know what you've been talking about and talking through, but the officials we're talking to say they're confident on the intelligence.
Yeah, they've said that to me too. Thank you, Brett. We'll be checking, of course, in with Brett Baer for the rest of the night as we follow this unfolding story. The president is set to speak in about 4 minutes. I want to go back to Colonel Macgregor, who's still here in the studio with us. So the idea that the United States could know for certain the chemical attack came from the Syrian government in less than a week after the attack seems implausible. That's what they're saying. What's your take on that?
Well, I know that the Swedish government offered to conduct a thorough investigation, and that was rejected in the UN by us and our allies. So it would seem that we've decided to strike on the basis of what we say we know. And let's be frank, again, 250,000 people have been killed in this war. This war is about over. The Turks, the Iranians, and the Russians are going to divide up Syria. That's inevitable. They hopefully will be able to establish peace, but that presupposes that they can all reach an amicable solution. The question is, why are we doing this?
Well, we're obviously being pushed by other countries to do this, and is it possible, since we are doing it, and we're going to hear the details in about 3 minutes, is it possible to act in a way that helps us, that benefits the United States?
Well, frankly, no, because, again, this is over. The decision has been made. We have no role in Syria for all intents and purposes. Secondly, the targets, if they are only Syrian targets and we are informing the Russians ahead of time, are irrelevant. The Syrians don't have enough to make
I stop you there
any
and ask, do you think it's likely that, as in the case last year, that we've alerted the Russians where we're striking so they can move their troops out of the way?
I suspect so. I think so. I'd be surprised if we did not. Because, again, do we want to risk a serious confrontation with the Russians? I hope the president will tell us when he speaks. But I suspect he will say, yes, we have informed the Russians because we're pinning this exclusively on the Syrian government. But hitting the Syrian government installations is irrelevant.
So the attack, the missile strike almost exactly a year ago, took place less than a week after the United States announced a change in its policy towards Syria, that we're no longer going to try and take out the Assad government.
Right.
Less than a week later, there was this chemical attack that we said the Assad government committed. This attack comes about a little over a week after we announced another policy change, which would be pulling our 2,000 troops out of Syria. Do you have to be a conspiracy nut to see that maybe there's a connection between the changes in policy and these chemical attacks?
No, I don't think you do. And that's why I think Americans should be skeptical of what they're hearing. It would have been better to have had a thorough investigation by a third party. We went through this in the past in Europe. We had the Finns come in who were considered to be reliable, uninvolved partners that settled these kinds of issues. I don't think we want to settle the issue. I think we want to strike. I think there is an enormous amount of support and interest inside the United States, in Washington, in the Department of Defense, in the State Department, to keep us in Syria, to keep that little 2,000-man force up in the northeastern corner of that country. I think it's foolish. I think it's self-defeating and unnecessary, and it actually raises the stakes down the line. I think we should get out. I agree with the president.
It also raises the question, who's in charge? I mean, you can elect a president on the basis of one thing, and you find out that, you know, the person you voted for is not really in charge.
Well, the swamp seems to be everywhere.
Yeah, it does. Of course, there's a lot going on, and we're going to relinquish this show, but Fox coverage, of course, will continue. Bret Baier, Jennifer Griffin, the entire Fox News team will be here throughout the night for developments on Syria. We're looking where it looks like we're about 20 seconds away from what we think will be a live address from the President of the United States from Washington. As you heard Bret Baier say, by the way, the Vice President is traveling in South America, Peru, and the pool was pulled back to its hotel. So we'll find out very soon.